UnchartedX, a YouTuber who talks a lot about alternative theories of history, recently earned himself a spot on the Joe Rogan podcast, and his channel has absolutely exploded in the wake of that, which is always really great to see. I've been subscribed to his channel for about 3 years now. He had a video that went absolutely nuclear called Evidence for Ancient High Technology Part 1 Machining. That's probably how a lot of people found him. And in the wake of his appearance on Rogan, a host of critics have surfaced, as will always be the case. And there are a couple ideas I want to talk about because I'm not sure they should be quite so controversial as they seem to be. Now, here I'm not even going to get into the idea of sonics, ultrasonics, supersonics. I'm not going to get into any of that because what happens with these types of arguments is that sometimes where the arguments or ideas come out, that is to say, where the conclusion happens, is not as rational as the questions that bring it up. For example, there's a lot of debate as to whether or not the ancient Egyptians had technologies that we don't believe they had, because they were able to do some things that we can't explain particularly well with the types of materials we knew they could have worked with. So, when you get on the other side of this argument, there are people who lead down this path and decide something such as, well, if we don't know how they moved stones that were that big, if we don't know how they were able to construct X, Y, and Z, it was done with sound. I'm not going to make that argument. I think it's interesting, but I'm not going to come out in that place. Because what happens is, oftentimes an argument comes out in that place, and someone who does not believe the conclusion to be reasonable holds all of the previous doubt in question. So all of the questions that someone like UnchartedX comes up with are written off as silly and peculiar, as opposed to having merit. The first is the idea of lost technology. This concept, especially in the West, where the quote-unquote Dark Ages set things back quite a bit, shouldn't be all that controversial. But this does not have to take place in the face of a complete societal collapse, as was the case with the Dark Ages and the Black Plague, and losing, for example, the technology of running water. I'm going to start with a personal story. I work retail, and retail, being about as banal as it gets, will serve to show how simply something like lost technology can happen. It's easy not to consider the quandary that something like trash poses on a retailer-by-retailer basis. We have the problem relatively under control as a society at large. So who cares what happens at the local five and dime? Well, at one local five and dime, the entire management staff basically just walked out, leaving only cashiers as the remaining front store associates. I was transferred to just such a location, and at that location, we had to try to run things and clean the place up. As you can imagine, for an entire management staff to have walked out, things were in pretty terrible condition. There were a number of truck deliveries still stacked up in the back room. Myself and another manager, new to the location, we just dove right in. Full case truck, things which the store receives enough pieces that the warehouse just sends the whole box. That stuff is always a much bigger pain to work than the totes. So the previous managers just didn't do it. They just let it stack up. By the end of the day, we had, between the two of us, hundreds of boxes sitting in the back room. Pyramids of empty cardboard. So, we decided to go ahead and end the day by taking the trash out. We popped open the back door, and each of us walked out with an armful of boxes. The store that each of us came from had, behind the store itself, a big recycling bin. And when we took the trash out at that store, we just threw the cardboard boxes in the big recycling bin. There was no cardboard bin in the back of this store. So we walked back in, went up to the front of the store, and asked the nice little old lady who had worked at that store forever, where was the cardboard bin? "Oh," she said, "you have to use the baler." "Oh," we said, "we have to use the baler." So we walked back into the back room, and sure enough, there was a massive baler, plain as day, in the corner of the back room. Not even knowing what it was, we'd just been walking right past it all day. The stores we were from didn't have a baler, so the two of us walked right up to the baler and just stared at it. For anyone who doesn't have experience with a cardboard baler, every one that I've ever worked with or used is way, way, way more complicated than it needs to be. We figured out how to throw the cardboard in the thing itself, which was a two-part process, having to unlock it, having to find the key, unlock the baler, unlatch the baler, open the baler, and put the cardboard in. But after that, you still have to know how to run it. So I went back up to that little old lady up front and asked her how to use it. She had no idea. So, because she just ran the register, okay, we'd wait until the next day and ask whoever else came in. The next day, there were a couple other cashiers. Neither had they any idea how to use the baler. After figuring out how to use the baler, you then have to figure out how to bind the bale of cardboard, get it out of the baler, and stash the bale. This is a very simple example, but let's look at it a little closer. Let's really break it down to where it could be applicable to something bigger than just a store. Someone much smarter than me had built a cardboard baler. The next generation didn't have to build the baler, they were trained how to use it. They couldn't have built it for themselves, but they didn't have to. So long as that baler worked, it was sunshine and rainbows. But then, that generation of managers left, i.e., died. You can look at it that way on a societal basis. They really just quit. But you see where I'm going here. They did not teach the next generation, me, how to use the baler. And even though I fancy myself the third generation, a good deal more intelligent than that second generation, it didn't matter. I was not as intelligent as the first generation and couldn't reverse engineer the baler and how it worked. So in just 3 generations, that technology went from exciting, new, useful equipment to the second generation, seeing it as mysterious, necessary technology, to the third generation, where it was just interesting, an interesting, nearly invisible monument parked in the corner. This is even though there were still individuals around who were there for Generation 1, the cashiers. Now, I understand how silly this seems because the scale is completely different. But that's just it. The scale is completely different. My story was about trash day on the corner 5 and dime. Imagine if, instead of a baler, it was the knowledge of writing, language, or mathematics. Very quickly, Without those tools, the third generation is absolutely destitute when compared to the first generation. Now a few words about deep time, and I'm going to use another retail analogy because I think it obviates something which might otherwise just be ignored. So here's the problem with deep time. There's deep time on a civilizational scale. Why don't we believe in it? We don't have the evidence for it. You go to Egypt, you've got the buildings and the monuments, you wipe your hands, lick your fingers, stick your finger in the air, and okay, you're looking at about 6,000 BC. Just like you check the direction of the wind. When I was graduating high school, the company I worked for was bought by a much bigger company. The previous company had some locations which were older and sort of run down. Really sort of falling apart, if I'm going to be honest. They were the type of places with which this fancy new company did not want to be associated. The problem was, they were on really good corners for business, so you can't abandon them. What did they decide to do? Well, they tore down the old stores and built fancy new ones in their place. Like the place I work now. And guess what? Without pictures of the place, and especially without writing, there would be absolutely zero record of that first store having ever existed on that corner. The building I work in right now was rebuilt in 2005 after having originally been built in the 1920s, I believe. So, right now, if you were to go there and you were able to date every brick in that store to the day it was used to build the location, and you were to get them all correct and they were all made on the same year as that store's construction, if you were to tell me when that 5 and dime was put up, you would be wrong by 80 years. 80 years, and we're just 18 years removed from the actual construction of the building. In the ancient world, and in fact before the ancient world as we know it, without cars and trains, without planes and buses, what are the odds that the same real estate had to be recycled to avoid an urban sprawl that made a day's foot travel impossible? Compounding this improbability in my estimation, you're telling me that 6,000 BC, about 8,000 years ago, humankind finally pulls their britches up and decides to do a civilization. And right out of the box, they accomplish Egypt? Listen, I was in the 4th grade before my Q's were passable English script. I still struggle writing the number 8. We, as a species, don't do anything well the first time. What are the odds we rolled the dice and hit the Great Pyramid? These things might seem like silly examples compared to the theories wrought by folks with fancy doctorate degrees, but they are examples rooted today with our technologies and insights. We have the same biological hardware as the people a few thousand years ago, so I'm willing to bet they had microcosms and societal hiccups the same way as we do. And I'm willing to bet we're only just learning how weird the past really is. That's all I have for this essay. Video essays are something I am doing much more often on the channel. This is a channel where I also do movie reviews. I talk a little bit about philosophy. I talk about goal setting and things like that. If you find yourself maybe interested in things like that, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more. And if you want to help me with what I'm doing on this channel, it really does me good if you decide to hit that like button.